They say the lantern guides the lost, but here...
My brother Darren found the listing on a foreclosure website 3 weeks before the first confirmed bite in Memphis. 7 acres of compacted metal on the outskirts of Brinkley, Arkansas. A defunct auto salvage operation called Hooper's Pull-Apart. The previous owner had died of a stroke at 71, and his children wanted nothing to do with a landlocked graveyard of Chevrolets and Fords sinking into Delta mud. The asking price was $38,000. We offered $29,500, and they took it the same afternoon. I didn't buy the junkyard because I believed the world was ending. I bought it because my marriage was dissolving, and I needed something to do with the settlement money before my ex-wife's attorney found a way to attach it. $50,000. The last liquid sum the Purcell family had between my share and Darren's disability check savings. My daughter B, who was 14 and already mastering the art of making me feel like a footnote in her life, told me I was building a monument to my paranoia. She wasn't wrong, but paranoia and preparation look identical until one of them saves your life. If you've ever been called paranoid for preparing, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. And if you want to see whether this place became a mistake or a fortress, consider subscribing. Darren had the engineering mind. 11 years in the Navy, 4 of them on a submarine tender, and a spinal injury that sent him home to Pine Bluff with a fused L4 to L5 and a monthly government check that barely covered his trailer payment. When I showed him the listing, he didn't talk about property value or resale. He pulled up the satellite image on his cracked laptop and pointed at the drainage culvert running under the southeast corner. "That's our spine," he said. 48-inch corrugated steel, probably runs 200 feet to the creek. We build off that. We've got ventilation, emergency egress, and a water source inside the perimeter. I told him we had $20,000 left after the land purchase. He told me that was enough if we did the labor ourselves and sourced materials from what was already there. A junkyard, he reminded me, isn't a pile of trash. It's a warehouse with no roof. We started digging the second weekend of June. Arkansas in summer is a breathing oven. The air thick enough to leave a film on your skin by 7 in the morning. The soil under Hooper's yard was a blessing nobody expected. 3 feet of clay cap over sandy loam that cut like cold butter once you got below the baked surface. Darren rented a mini excavator from an equipment yard in Stuttgart for $400 a week. I ran the machine while he directed from ground level, marking corners with orange spray paint and checking grade with a laser level he'd bought at a Navy surplus auction 6 years earlier. The hole was 12 feet deep, 30 feet long, 16 feet wide. We framed the walls with steel panels cut from a shipping container that had been sitting behind the yard office since 2016. Darren torched it apart with an oxyacetylene rig, and we lowered the sections in with the excavator boom and a set of chain slings that made my hands shake every time they took the load. The ceiling was the bed of a 1997 Freightliner flatbed. 7-gauge steel, strong enough to hold the 4 feet of earth and compacted scrap we'd pile on top. B came down from Little Rock on the 3rd weekend. Her mother had dropped her off with a duffel bag, an expression that told me Renee was happy to have 3 days free of a teenager's judgment. B stood at the edge of the excavation in her white tennis shoes and looked down at me standing in the mud, shirtless, sunburned across the shoulders, holding a section of cut steel with a gloved hand. "This is what you spend it on," she said. Not a question. I told her it was an investment. She said, "In what?" Darren answered before I could. "Peace of mind," he called from inside the pit, and the welding arc flared blue behind him like something holy in a place that smelled like rust and diesel. B sat on the bumper of my truck and watched for 2 hours without another word. That silence was the loudest opinion she'd ever given me. By the first week of July, the bunker had walls, a ceiling, and a floor made from interlocking rubber mats Darren had pulled from the bed of a decommissioned Army transport truck rotting in the northeast quadrant of the yard. We sealed the walls with a rubberized asphalt membrane, the kind used for commercial roofing, and ran the drainage culvert's 48-inch pipe directly into the east wall. creating a tunnel that exited into a bramble-choked ravine 90 yards away. Anyone crawling out would emerge below the sight line of the yard itself. That was Darren's thinking. Always the exit before the entrance. The entrance was the part that made me proud. We sank a school bus, a 2004 Bluebird, 65-passenger, that had been sitting on flats behind the crusher since Hooper closed the yard. Darren and I dug a ramp trench, rolled the bus in nose first at a 15-degree decline, using the excavator and a come-along winch rated for 8 tons, and positioned it so the rear emergency door made it flush with the bunker's west wall. Then we buried it, 4 feet of earth and the scrap on top, with a carefully stacked pile of engine blocks and fenders arranged to look like every other mound in the yard. To get in, you walked to what looked like a rusted Dodge Dakota sitting on a pile of tires. The Dakota's passenger door opened onto a vertical shaft, a section of culvert pipe we'd welded into the bus roof, and a ladder made from rebar rungs led down into the bus interior, which became our hallway. 40 feet of yellow steel tube connecting the surface to the bunker. The bus windows were filled with spray foam and covered with sheet metal inside. It was ugly. It was brilliant. It was Darren's mind made physical. I spent $1,100 on a composting toilet system and $400 on a hand pump well kit that Darren sank into the bunker floor, drilling down 14 feet to hit the same water table that fed the creek. The water came up brown for 2 days and then cleared to something that tasted like pennies, but tested clean with the strips I ordered from a camping supply company. We built bunks from angle iron and plywood, 6 of them, stacked in pairs along the north wall. Storage shelves from the bus's luggage racks remounted on the bunker's south wall. A ventilation system Darren built from dryer ducts and a 12-volt fan wired to a marine battery. Total cost at that point, $47,200. We had $2,800 left and a bunker that could sustain 4 people for roughly 60 days if we stocked it correctly. Then the news started validating what we'd built. July 9th, 3 cases of an atypical rabies variant at a hospital in Shelby County, Tennessee. July 11th, 17 cases. July 14th, the CDC issued a travel advisory for the Memphis metropolitan area. I was in the bunker running speaker wire for a battery-powered radio when Darren came down the ladder with his phone, his face carrying something I'd never seen on him before. Not fear, but the absence of the low-grade amusement that usually lived behind his eyes. "They're biting people in Walmart parking lots," he said. 3 dead in South Haven. I asked if this was the thing. He said he didn't know, but his hands were already working, pulling canned goods from the box we'd brought down that morning, arranging them on the shelf with labels facing out, spacing them like he was setting up a supply locker on a ship. His body knew before his mouth would say it. I called B's mother that evening. Renee answered with the particular coldness she reserved for conversations about money. "It's not about money," I said. "I need B down here. You need to stop scaring her with your projects. Renee, turn on the news." The line went quiet for 8 seconds. I heard a television volume climb in the background. Then Renee said something I'd never heard from her in 12 years of marriage. "Tell me what to bring." B arrived the next morning with 2 suitcases and the kind of fear that lives behind the eyes of children who understand they are being moved to safety. Renee didn't come. She said she'd follow in 2 days once she settled things at her office. She managed a dental practice in West Little Rock and had patients on the books through Friday. I told her patients wouldn't matter by Friday. She told me I'd been saying that kind of thing for years, and the world kept turning. I hung up and directed B to stow her bags in the bunker while I stood in the junkyard's gravel lot, staring at the sun dropping behind a wall of stacked sedans, and tried to calculate how many chances I had left to convince someone I wasn't insane. B took to the bunker the way cats take to cardboard boxes, immediately and without explanation. She claimed the bottom bunk on the far end, hung a battery-powered LED strip above it, and organized her corner with a precision that made Darren grin. "She's Navy material," he said, which was the highest compliment in his vocabulary. "I'm not joining the Navy." B said, without looking up from folding a sweatshirt. Nobody's asking you to, I said. You built a submarine under a junkyard. I think the Navy came to us. Darren laughed. A real one. The kind that moved his whole torso and made his back hurt. Which made him stop laughing, Mom, and reach for his spine. Which made B look up with concern she would never have shown me. The two of them had a shorthand I didn't share. Darren had been the uncle who showed up to school events when I was working. The uncle who taught her to change a tire, to solder a circuit, to read a topographic map. I was the father who paid for things, and argued with her mother on the phone at volumes that carried through drywall. My brother had built with my daughter the thing I'd spent $50,000 trying to construct. A place where someone felt safe. We spent July 15th stalking. Darren and I drove the truck to a Sam's Club in Forest City, 26 miles east. The parking lot was full. Not panic full, but unsettled. The way a herd gets before a storm, when no individual animal has started running. But every ear is turned the same direction. People were buying water and batteries and canned meat. No one was fighting yet. A woman in a Razorback's hoodie had a cart with 14 cases of bottled water and a look on her face that said she wanted to buy more, but was ashamed to. We loaded rice, beans, canned chicken, powdered milk, multivitamins, a case of peanut butter, bleach, duct tape, trash bags, and medical supplies, gauze, ibuprofen, hydrogen peroxide, a bottle of broad-spectrum antibiotics Darren obtained from the pet supply aisle, which sells fish amoxicillin that is chemically identical to the human version. Total, $1,340. I paid in cash. The cashier didn't look at us. She was watching the television mounted above the service desk, where a news anchor was explaining that the National Guard had been deployed to 3 counties in western Tennessee. On the drive back, we passed a man walking along Highway 70 carrying a gas can and a child's car seat with no child in it. Darren watched him in the side mirror until we rounded a curve. Neither of us said anything. There was nothing to say that the image hadn't already said. That night, I sat on the bunker floor with the radio tuned to AM stations, cycling through frequencies. Most of it was regular programming. Sports talk, gospel, a farm report out of Jonesboro. But between the stations, in the static, I found a woman's voice on a frequency I couldn't identify, repeating a sequence. Shelby County containment failed. DeSoto County containment failed. Marshall County containment failed. She listed them like a roll call. Each name a door that had been opened and could not be closed. B was asleep above me, her breathing slow and even. Darren sat on the opposite bunk cleaning a Remington 870 he'd brought from Pine Bluff. The action clicking in the rhythm of a man performing a task he'd done 1,000 times. How far is Marshall County? I asked him. Mississippi, 130 miles. How fast is it moving? He didn't answer. He racked the slide and set the shotgun against the wall with a gentleness that contradicted everything about its purpose. I need to explain the junkyard's geography because what we did with it in the next 5 days is the reason we survived the first wave while most of Brinkley did not. Hooper's pull-apart sat on 7 acres, shaped roughly like a boot print. Wide at the north end, narrowing to a heel at the south where the access road met County Route 4. The north boundary was a tree line of water oaks and sweet gum running along a stagnant drainage canal. East and west were open fields, soybeans in rotation, flat as a table. The south gate was a double-wide chain-link affair with a cattle guard set into the gravel drive. The yard itself held approximately 400 vehicles in various states of disassembly, arranged in rough rows that had degraded over the years into clusters and piles. Sedans crushed flat. Pickup trucks standing on bare rims. A row of minivans with their side panels removed like dissected specimens. Everything rusting, sinking, fusing into the ground. And between the vehicles, paths, narrow corridors of packed dirt that a person could walk, but a crowd could not. Darren saw it on the first day and said it out loud. It's a maze. He was right. A junkyard is an accidental labyrinth. Dead ends, choke points, elevated positions on stacked cars, blind corners, and steel everywhere. Barriers that couldn't be pushed through, only navigated around. The infected, we'd learn, moved in straight lines when they could. They followed sound, they followed sight, and they hit obstacles the way water hits a dam. They pressed against it until they found the edge, then flowed around. A junkyard turned their straight-line aggression into something looping and slow. But it wasn't enough passively. Darren spent July 16th and 17th redesigning the yard's internal paths. He used the excavator to drag vehicles into new positions, creating a single viable route from the south gate to the bunker entrance, a winding switchback path that doubled the distance and forced 6 right-angled turns. Every other corridor became a dead end. He collapsed paths by shoving cars together until their bodies met, leaving gaps only wide enough for rats and runoff. At 3 points along the viable route, he created pinch points, corridors so narrow that only one person could pass at a time, with elevated positions on either side where someone with a weapon could stand on a car roof and control the passage below. I asked him if this was submarine thinking. "It's damage control thinking," he said. "You don't try to save the whole ship. You isolate the flooding to one compartment and deal with it there." B helped. She climbed car stacks with an agility that made my chest tighten and spray-painted directional arrows on windshields. Red for dead end, green for viable, so we could navigate at night. She also found something that changed our defensive options. A 2009 Chevy Tahoe with a functioning car alarm. Darren wired its battery to a switch inside the bunker. One flip and the Tahoe would scream from 200 yards north of our position, pulling anything that chased sound away from us and into a dead-end corridor, packed with stacked compacts. On July 18th, Darren and I drove the access road one last time and closed the south gate. We wrapped the chain link with razor wire we'd found in Hooper's equipment shed. Then we drove the truck inside, parked it in the corridor adjacent to the bunker entrance, and Darren used the excavator to push a wall of cars across the access road 40 feet inside the gate. A plug. Nothing on wheels was coming in or out. "We're locked in," I said. "We're secured," Darren corrected. "There's a difference." B was sitting on the roof of a Ford Taurus, her legs dangling over the edge, watching us close the last gap. Her face had changed in the 4 days since she'd arrived. The teenage affect, that practiced boredom, that ostentatious indifference, had peeled back, and underneath was something alert, almost feral. She was watching the tree line to the north the way Darren watched things, steady, patient, cataloging. "Dad," she called down. "There's someone in the field." I climbed up beside her. A quarter-mile east, crossing the soybean rows, a figure moved with the particular gait we'd seen on television but never in person. That stuttering, overcommitted lurch, like someone falling forward and catching themselves on the wrong leg. The first one. Still distant, still singular. Not for long. The figure in the soybean field never reached our fence. It veered south toward the county road and disappeared behind a tree line. And for the rest of that evening, I managed to convince myself it had been a drunk, or a heat stroke case, or any of the human conditions that mimic what we'd been watching on screens. Denial is not a wall. It's a fog. It doesn't stop anything. It just prevents you from seeing what's already inside the room. July 19th dissolved the fog. At 6:14 in the morning, Darren shook me awake in the bunker and pressed a finger to his lips. We climbed the rebar ladder into the bus, then up through the Dakota shaft into the gray pre-dawn. The sound hit me before the sight did. A low, wet moaning from multiple sources, the way a choir sounds when warming up. Individual voices unsynchronized, each following its own tempo, the collective effect deeply and specifically wrong. 11 of them stood along the north fence line, pressed against the chain link, facing the tree line behind them rather than the yard. Something in the drainage canal had drawn them. A sound, an animal, a memory of direction. They weren't trying to get in. They didn't know we were here, but their hands were on our fence, and the fence was moving, and the posts Hooper had sunk in 1987 were not designed to resist 11 bodies. Leaning with the mindless constancy of tide, Darren pointed to the northeast corner, where 2 posts had already begun to lean inward. Then he pointed to his watch. Then he held up 5 fingers. 5 hours, he estimated, before the posts yielded and the chain link folded. We moved in silence. I took the bolt cutters from the equipment shed and cut the wire ties holding the chain link to a 40-foot section of top rail between 2 compromised posts. Darren used the excavator. Its engine noise was a risk, but the machine was the only thing that could do the work in time. To drag a line of 6 compacted car shells from the crusher stack and press them against the north fence from the inside, reinforcing the chain link with 3 feet of solid steel. The excavator's rumbles shifted the 11 toward us, their heads turning in unison with a mechanical synchrony that made my hands feel cold despite the 90-degree air. They found the gap before Darren finished the wall. 2 of them slipped through where the cut chain link had pulled away from the rail, stumbling over the drainage culvert and into the yard's north quadrant. I saw them clearly for the first time. A man in a FedEx uniform with a throat wound that had stopped bleeding days ago, and a woman in a nightgown whose left arm ended at the elbow in a crusted stump. Their eyes tracked movement. Their mouths worked constantly, producing that low, tonal moan. They smelled like a freezer that had lost power in July. Sweet, heavy, dense enough to taste. I was standing on a stack of cars 12 feet above them, with the Remington in my hands. Darren had taught me to shoot when I was 15. I'd gone hunting a dozen times since. But I stood there with the bead on the FedEx man's head, and my finger would not complete the 2 pounds of trigger pull, because the man was still wearing his work shoes and they were still tied, and the knot was a double bow, the kind a careful person makes, and that small competence, that evidence of a morning routine. Waking up, putting on the uniform, tying the shoes with an extra loop because the laces were long. That was the thing that locked my hands. Bee's voice from behind me. "Dad, they're going toward the path." The 2 had entered the viable route, the switchback corridor that led to the bunker entrance. They followed it, not because they understood it, but because it was the only gap between the steel walls on either side. Darren appeared at the first pinch point with a 3-foot section of steel pipe. He waited until the FedEx man entered the narrow corridor. The sound was brief, mechanical, final. Then the woman in the nightgown. Same corridor, same result. Darren set the pipe down and looked at his hands. "We need a better solution for the fence," he said, as if what had just happened was a maintenance issue and not the first 2 deaths. The better solution came from B, and it didn't involve the fence at all. She had spent the morning of July 19th on the roof of the yard office, a prefab metal structure near the south gate that gave a 360-degree view across the flat terrain. She'd brought Darren's binoculars and a school notebook, and when she came down at noon, she had 3 pages of observations written in handwriting so precise it looked typeset. "They follow each other," she said, spreading the notebook on the bunker's plywood table. "Not in a pack like wolves. More like, you know how one ant finds sugar and the others follow the chemical trail? One goes somewhere, and the ones nearby start drifting the same direction, but they lose interest fast. If the one in front stops, the ones behind start wandering in about 4 minutes." Darren leaned over the notebook. B had drawn a map of the north field with timestamps and directional arrows. "They came from 3 separate directions," she said, pointing. "This group from the highway. These 2 from the canal. This one from the tree line. They converged on the fence because the first one moaned when it got tangled in the brush, and the others followed the sound. Once they were all at the fence, they kept moaning, which kept them all there. It's a feedback loop." I looked at my daughter, who 48 hours ago had been complaining about the lack of cell service, and tried to reconcile the child with the analyst. "What breaks the loop?" Darren asked. "A new sound. Something louder, farther away. They'll follow it. All of them." That was when Darren smiled and pointed toward the corridor, where the wired Tahoe sat. We tested it that afternoon. 11 infected remained along the north fence, joined by 3 more who had emerged from the soybean field. Darren flipped the switch from inside the bunker. The Tahoe's alarm erupted. That obnoxious cycling wail of horn blasts and siren tones. From the dead-end corridor 200 yards north of our position. Within 90 seconds, every infected figure along the fence turned and began moving toward the sound. They flowed along the outside of the fence line, found the gap where the chain link had been cut, entered the yard, and followed the open corridors toward the noise. The junkyard's maze did the rest. The dead-end corridor funneled them into a space between 3 rows of stacked cars with no exit. When Darren killed the alarm 4 minutes later, they milled inside the steel canyon, bumping against metal, moaning, but unable to locate the way out. "Now what?" I said. "Now nothing. They're contained. When that space fills up, we open a path to the next dead end." B was already drawing new corridor maps. She sketched 6 containment zones across the northern half of the yard, each accessible via a single path that could be opened by dragging 1 car aside, each terminating in a steel-walled pocket with no exit. A roach motel built from Buicks and Corollas. "You're good at this," Darren told her. And I watched my daughter receive praise from my brother and process it with a quiet competence that looked nothing like the teenager who'd stood at the edge of the excavation in white tennis shoes 3 weeks earlier. That night, I tried calling Renee. The call connected, but went to voicemail. I tried 4 more times with the same result. The last time, a recorded message preceded the voicemail. Not Renee's outgoing message, but a carrier notification. "All circuits in the requested area are currently unavailable. Please try again later." B was sitting across the bunker when I set the phone down. She didn't ask who I'd called. She didn't ask if her mother had answered. She returned to the notebook and began calculating the volumetric capacity of Containment Zone 3, cross-referencing it with the average shoulder width she'd estimated from her observations. Her handwriting didn't waver, but her breathing had changed. Shorter, shallower, controlled the way breathing is controlled when the body wants to do something the mind won't permit. I opened my mouth to say something comforting and discovered I didn't have the architecture for it. I'd spent $50,000 on steel and concrete, and not a single dollar learning how to speak to my own daughter about loss. The first week of confinement taught me that a bunker doesn't feel small on day 1. It feels small on day 6, when the novelty of survival has worn off, and the reality of dimensions becomes a physical sensation. The ceiling pressing down, not with weight, but with persistence. The walls not closing in, but refusing to expand. The air carrying the same 3 people's breath in a cycle that never refreshes, no matter how many times the 12-volt fan pushes it through the dryer duct. Darren managed confinement the way he'd managed submarine deployments, through ritual. He woke at 0600, checked the ventilation, pumped water, inventoried 1 shelf of supplies, performed his back exercises on the rubber mat floor, and ascended to the surface for a 20-minute perimeter survey. His day had checkpoints. His mind had structure. The bunker was not a prison to him. It was a duty station, and duty stations had watches. B adapted through work. She maintained the notebook, now expanded to 4 volumes, documenting every observable pattern. She'd discovered that the infected in Containment Zone 1 had begun to decay at a visible rate. Their motor function degrading, their moaning becoming less frequent, their response to stimulus slower. "They have a shelf life," she told Darren on day 4. And the phrase was so clinical, so stripped of horror, that I realized my daughter was protecting herself with the same tool I'd watched her mother use throughout our marriage: language as distance. I adapted poorly. My ritual was checking the phone for signal, finding none, and placing it back on the shelf. My contribution to the bunker's operation was cooking heating cans on a portable butane stove, mixing powdered milk, rationing peanut butter, with the precision of a man who had nothing else to be precise about. Darren ran the perimeter. B ran the intelligence. I ran the kitchen, and in the hierarchy of survival value, A cook ranked somewhere below the man who cleared bodies from the pinch points, and the teenager who predicted threat migration. On July 26th, something changed. Not in the bunker, in the yard. Darren came down from his morning survey with mud on his boots and a new expression. Not fear, not urgency, but a kind of focused confusion, like a mechanic hearing an engine noise he can't diagnose. "The containment zones are empty," he said. Bea looked up from her notebook. "Which one?" "All of them." She set her pen down slowly. "That's not possible. They can't navigate out. I checked every zone for gaps. I'm telling you what I saw. All 3 zones, empty. No bodies, no stragglers. The cars are still in position. The paths are still blocked." I asked if they could have decayed entirely. Darren shook his head. It had been 8 days. In Arkansas, heat accelerates decomposition, but not to the point of erasing 20-plus bodies. There would be remains, stains, bones. "There's nothing," he said. "The ground is scuffed, like something was dragged. But there's nothing there." Bea climbed to the office roof. She spent 2 hours scanning with binoculars while Darren and I walked the empty zones, looking for any evidence of what had been there. We found marks in the packed dirt. Long parallel grooves like heel drags, converging toward the north fence and then continuing through the gap into the soybean field. Something had pulled or led the infected out during the night. We hadn't heard it. The bunker's steel and earth insulation, which protected us from sound, had also protected us from warning. "Something is collecting them," Bea said when she came down. Darren said that was anthropomorphizing. Bea said she didn't care what the word was. The drag marks all went the same direction. And things don't move in coordinated directions, without a reason. That night, for the first time since we sealed the perimeter, I heard a sound from outside that wasn't moaning, wasn't mechanical, wasn't wind. It was rhythmic. A tapping, metal on metal, coming from the north side of the yard, evenly spaced, continuing for exactly 2 minutes before stopping. Something was knocking on the maze, and it was using a pattern. We didn't investigate until dawn. Darren's rule, absolute and borrowed from whatever deep water protocol, had kept him alive for 4 years in a metal tube beneath the Atlantic. Never respond to unknown stimuli in darkness. You wait. You observe from a defended position at first light. You do not open the hatch. At 6:03 on July 27th, Darren and I climbed to the top of the car stack nearest the north perimeter. The tapping had not resumed. The soybean field was empty in every direction. The crop itself was dying, untended, the rows browning and collapsing into each other. The drainage canal held a foot of stagnant water and nothing else. The tree line beyond was still. Then Bea, on the office roof, called out, "Southeast, the access road. 1 person, walking upright." A living person walks differently from an infected one. And you learn to read the difference at distance, the way birders learn silhouettes. This figure moved with intention and variation, adjusting stride for the gravel, shifting a pack on their shoulders, turning their head to scan the perimeter. Human, alive, and heading directly toward our gate. Darren descended to the south approach and positioned himself behind the car wall plug we'd built across the access road, the Remington resting on the trunk of a Chrysler 300. I stayed on the elevated position with binoculars. Bea remained on the roof. The figure reached the gate at 6:11. A woman, late 40s, short graying hair, a hiking pack that rode high on her shoulders, and a bolt-action rifle slung across her chest. She stopped at the razor wire and looked at it for a long time, the way a person reads a sign. "I know someone's in there," she called out, not shouting. Conversational volume, the confidence of someone who has identified evidence and drawn a conclusion. Excavator tracks, fresh-cut metal, radio antenna on the south structure. "I've been watching from the tree line since last night." Darren's voice from behind the car wall. "Keep talking. My name is Gloria Parson. I'm a veterinarian from Duval's Bluff. I've been walking for 4 days. There is a herd. That's what I'm calling them, a herd. Moving south along Highway 70, hundreds. I've been parallel to them since Hazen, trying to stay east of their drift. They'll reach Brinkley by tomorrow morning. I looked at Darren through the binoculars. His face was performing calculations. Hundreds, he repeated. I stopped counting at 300. They move in a column. The ones in front wander, but the mass behind pushes them forward. It's like cattle in a chute. The ones on the edges peel off sometimes, but the body of the herd stays on the road because the road is the path of least resistance. B's voice from the roof. That matches my data. They follow each other, and they follow easy terrain. Gloria looked up toward the sound. You've been studying them. Yes. How old are you? 14. Gloria returned her gaze to the gate. I'm not asking to come in. I'm telling you what's coming so you can prepare. If you have a vehicle, go south now. If you don't, you need to make this place invisible. No sound, no light, no movement above the sight line. The herd doesn't hunt. It grazes. It passes through and moves on. But if something catches their attention, they stop. And when the ones behind pile up against the ones who've stopped, the pressure alone will flatten any fence you've got. Darren looked at me. I looked at the woman standing alone on a gravel road with a rifle and 4 days of road dust in her hair, delivering intelligence with the calm of someone accustomed to entering a barn and assessing which animals will survive the night and which won't. Open the gate, I told Darren. He didn't move. She came here to warn us. She could have walked past. People who walk toward strangers in a crisis want something. Gloria, who apparently had exceptional hearing, responded to that directly. I want to not be standing in the open when 300 corpses come down that road. That's what I want. Darren opened the gate. Gloria Parson entered the junkyard the way she would have entered a livestock pen, slow, eyes moving, reading the space for hazards and assets simultaneously. She noted the maze structure immediately, running her hand along the flank of a crushed impala and looking down the corridor toward the first pinch point. You funneled them, she said. My brother's design, I said. Your brother thinks like a parasitologist. Channel the pathogen, contain it, study it. She adjusted her pack. The problem is scale. Your channels work for 10, 20, maybe 50. What's coming won't channel. It'll flood. Darren had joined us by then, walking behind Gloria at a distance that communicated both courtesy and suspicion. What do you recommend? Passivity. Total sensory absence. They respond to sound first, movement second, scent third. If this place produces none of those, the herd will follow the road right past your gate. The road is their river. They won't leave it unless something pulls them out. B had descended from the roof and was standing at the edge of the viable path, studying Gloria with the same analytical detachment she applied to the infected. You said scent third. How do you know the hierarchy? Gloria unshouldered her pack and sat on the running board of a gutted Silverado. Because I spent 6 days in my clinic in Duval's Bluff with 40 animals in cages and boards over the windows. The infected gathered outside because the dogs were barking. Sound. When I muzzled the dogs, the ones outside started drifting away. They couldn't see movement through the boards, but a few stayed, circling the building, pressing their faces against the walls. Those ones were smelling the animals. It took them longer to find us by scent, and they didn't recruit others the way sound does. Scent is individual. Sound is collective. She delivered this with the detached specificity of a clinical observation, and I understood then that Gloria had been doing what B had been doing, watching, recording, building a behavioral model from evidence, but with 30 years more experience in observing non-human biology. What happened to the animals? He asked. Gloria met her eyes. I released them before I left. The dogs went east. The cats vanished. 2 goats followed me for a mile and then found a garden. She paused. The animals in my operating room I couldn't release. I did what was appropriate. The word appropriate carried a weight that foreclosed further questions. We spent the remainder of July 27th preparing for passivity. Darren disconnected the Tahoe's alarm. Its purpose as a lure was now a liability. We buried the remaining exposed metal that might reflect sunlight and catch an infected eye. Gloria suggested we drain the hand pump well into storage containers and seal the pump, because the rhythmic sound of pumping could carry further than we thought. B calculated our water reserves. 18 days at current consumption if all 4 of us drew from stored supply alone. That evening, in the bunker, Gloria saw the notebook. She read for an hour without speaking, turning pages with a veterinarian's careful fingers, occasionally making a small sound, not approval or disapproval, but recognition. The sound of someone encountering data that confirms a private hypothesis. Your daughter has documented a decay curve, she told me. The motor function data she recorded on the containment zone subjects. If you plot it, it's a sigmoid. Rapid initial decline, plateau, then accelerated collapse. The same curve you see in prion diseases in cattle. Is that what this is? I asked. Prions? I don't know what this is, but it behaves like a biological agent with a finite viability in the host. They don't last forever. The ones in the herd. I watched some of them fall and not get up. The herd walked over them. Whatever this is, it burns through the body. Weeks, maybe a month. So we wait them out, Darren said. If you have enough food and water and patience, yes. You wait. The wave passes. The individual stragglers decay, and then you deal with whatever the world looks like after. B closed the notebook and looked at Gloria. What does it look like after? Gloria Parson, who had walked 4 days through the collapse of eastern Arkansas, said, I don't know. I haven't seen after yet. They arrived at 4:17 in the morning on July 28th. Not with a sound, but with a vibration. A subsonic tremor that traveled through the earth into the bunker floor and into the frame of my bunk, where it registered not as shaking, but as a continuous, low-frequency pressure against the bones of my spine. I was awake before I understood why. Across the bunker, Darren was already sitting upright. Gloria had her boots on. B was motionless in her bunk, eyes open, both hands pressed flat against the wall. The ground is humming, she whispered. We did not go to the surface. Gloria's protocol was absolute. No movement above grade until the herd passed. We sat in the bunker and listened as the vibration resolved into components. The collective footfall of hundreds of bodies, the aggregate moan that was not one voice, but a composite, a sound that existed only as a crowd phenomenon, the way a wave exists only as a collective motion of water. It grew for 40 minutes. Darren timed it. The sound moved from north-northeast to south-southwest, tracking Highway 70's path through Brinkley. At peak density, the bunker's ceiling, the Freightliner bed buried under 4 feet of earth and scrap, transmitted a physical sensation that made the LED strips on B's bunk flicker from the vibration in their adhesive mounting. Gloria sat on the floor with her back against the wall and her eyes closed, her hands resting on her knees. I'd seen that posture in Darren during submarine stories, the practiced stillness of someone who has learned that panic in an enclosed space is a contagion more dangerous than whatever waits outside. B recorded. She held a mechanical pencil and wrote in the notebook, documenting duration, perceived volume, directional shift. Her hand was steady. At one point, the moan outside surged. A wave within the wave, some section of the herd reacting to a stimulus we couldn't identify. And the sound penetrated the bus corridor above us and filled the bunker with a resonance that sat in the chest cavity like a second heartbeat. B's pencil stopped for 3 seconds, then resumed. The herd passed Brinkley in 6 hours. We heard it diminish in stages, the peak sliding south, the trailing edge thinning, individual moans separating from the mass, the way instruments become distinct as an orchestra fades. By 10:30 in the morning, the vibration had ceased, and the sound had reduced to occasional low tones from the south, distant and directionless. We waited another 2 hours. Gloria's rule. Then Darren ascended. He was gone for 12 minutes. Longer than any previous survey, and when he came back down, he sat on his bunk and stared at the opposite wall for 30 seconds before speaking. The fence is down on the north side. Posts pulled out of the ground. The car barrier held. They went around it, through the field. The access road is... He stopped, tried again. The gravel is gone. Not displaced, gone. Like pavement after flooding. There's a path beaten into the dirt 100 feet wide where they walked. And there are a few that didn't make it. How many? Gloria asked. I counted 9. Down in the field, in the road. Not moving. B's decay curve. Collapsed units, B said. And the clinical term from a 14-year-old should have disturbed me, but instead it steadied me. Because language that contains horror inside a frame is language that allows you to continue functioning. There's something else, Darren said. He looked at me specifically, and I recognized the expression from when we were boys, and he had to tell our mother something that would result in consequences. The truck is gone. Our truck. The F-250 parked in the corridor near the bunker entrance. The herd had apparently pressured the cars in the viable route enough to shift the corridor walls, and in the rearrangement, the truck had been pushed laterally into the main path, where the herd's passage caught it and carried it. The chassis was visible 200 yards south on its side in the soybean field, halfway buried in mud. Our only vehicle, our resupply capability, our emergency evacuation option. Gloria summed it up. We're on foot now. The junkyard, which had been our fortress, had just become our fix. The question of staying versus leaving was never a binary. I want to make that clear because the stories people tell about crisis always compress decisions into a single dramatic moment. Someone stands at a crossroads, chooses, and the narrative follows the consequence. That isn't how it worked. The question was a constant, cycling pressure, renegotiated every morning with new data. On July 30th, 2 days after the herd, the data shifted. Gloria and I had climbed to the office roof for a joint survey. Darren's back was bad. 3 days of bunker living having seized his lumbar spine into a configuration that left him moving like a man made of welded parts. From the roof, the world looked scraped. The soybean fields were trampled flat in a swath that ran north-south as far as binoculars could resolve. Brinkley itself was visible to the southwest. Low roof lines, a water tower, the steeple of a Baptist church. And nothing moved there. No vehicles, no people, no infected. The town looked like a photograph. Gloria pointed east. Smoke. I found it through the binoculars. A column of gray rising from a position roughly 5 miles east, on the far side of the Cache River bottoms. Not wildfire. Too contained, too vertical. A signal fire, or a cooking fire, or a structure burning. But controlled combustion implies human agency, and human agency 5 miles away implied living people with the resources to burn something. Could be survivors who sheltered through the herd, Gloria said. Could be a group that arrived after. Could be people burning bodies, or a trap, I said. Because the one thing a junkyard teaches you is that not every intact-looking vehicle has a functioning engine. We reported to Darren and B. The 4 of us sat in the bunker around the plywood table. And for the first time, I felt the group's composition assert itself as a decision-making structure rather than a survival arrangement. Darren presented the tactical situation. No vehicle, limited supplies, defensible position degraded by fence loss. Gloria presented the biological situation. Individual infected would continue to pass through the area as the herd's trailing stragglers dispersed, but the main body had moved south and was unlikely to return. B presented the data. 18 days of water remaining, 32 days of food at current rationing, declining battery reserves for the ventilation fan and radio. I presented nothing. I had no expertise to contribute. I was the man who had written the check. Darren proposed reconnaissance, a 2-person team walking east to investigate the smoke, returning the same day. Gloria volunteered immediately. Darren volunteered immediately after. I said no. If something happened to both of them, B and I would be alone, with no military experience and no veterinary knowledge, and no one to clear the pinch points if infected entered the maze. Then I'll go with Gloria, B said. Every head turned. I'm faster than any of you. I can climb. I've studied the infected more hours than anyone at this table. And if something goes wrong, Gloria's medical knowledge is more useful to bring back than mine. The logic was impeccable, and the request was impossible. I said no with the force that surprised me. Not a parental no, which B would have dismantled with argument, but a visceral, chest-level rejection that came out as a single syllable dropped like a stone. B looked at me, and for the first time since she'd arrived, I saw her mother's expression on her face. That particular quiet fury that Renee deployed when she had been made to feel small by someone who had the authority, but not the reason to override her. Gloria broke the silence. She's right about the logic, but I'll go with you, she said to me. Darren holds the bunker. B runs the observation post. 2 experienced adults do the walk. If we're not back by dark, Darren makes the call. Darren nodded. B stared at me for 3 more seconds, then opened the notebook and began drawing the route to the smoke column, labeling terrain features, marking potential cover positions, and calculating walking times with the precision of someone who had just demonstrated that her father would always choose protection over respect. I took the page she'd drawn. Her route was better than anything I would have planned. Gloria and I left at 5 a.m. on July 31st, carrying water, the Remington, her bolt-action rifle, and a handheld radio that Darren had tuned to a frequency we'd designated for the group. The plan was simple. Walk east along the drainage culvert to the Cache River, follow the river south to a position that would give us a sight line on the smoke source, observe, and return. Total distance, roughly 10 miles. Total time, 6 to 8 hours. The first mile was dead landscape. Trampled soybeans, scattered debris. A shoe, a section of fabric. Something that might have been organic and that I chose not to examine. And the occasional collapsed infected, face down in the field in the posture of someone who had fallen asleep mid-stride. Gloria walked past these with the same attention she'd give a carcass on a farm road. Noted, assessed, catalogued as non-threatening, dismissed. I walked past them the way you walk past open graves. By mile 2, we'd reached the tree line along the Cache River bottoms, and the landscape changed from agricultural flatland to floodplain hardwood. Water oaks, pecans, cypress knees jutting from standing water. The air immediately 10 degrees cooler and saturated with decomposition. Not human decomposition. The normal vegetative rot of a bottomland summer. The swamp working through its cycle, indifferent to the collapse of the species that had once drained it for rice fields. Gloria moved through this terrain with comfort. She'd grown up in Monroe County, she told me. The first personal information she'd offered since arriving. Her family had farmed catfish before her generation, and she'd spent her childhood in bottomlands, identical to these. This is where the infected don't go, she said, stepping over a submerged log. They avoid standing water. I've never seen one voluntarily enter a flooded area. Maybe it's the footing. They don't have the coordination for uneven, submerged terrain. Maybe it's something else. But the bottoms are clear. You could have sheltered here, I said, instead of walking to us. I could have. But shelter isn't the same as company. And I've spent enough of my life alone in a barn to know that surviving without a conversation partner is just a different kind of dying. We found the smoke source at 8:40 a.m. from a low ridge above the eastern bank of the Cache. It wasn't a signal fire. It was a compound, 3 buildings behind a levee wall with a gravel yard between them, a functioning generator audible at 200 yards, and a communications antenna on the tallest roof that dwarfed anything Darren had rigged at the junkyard. Vehicles in the yard. 2 pickup trucks, a flatbed with a water tank, and an Arkansas Game and Fish Commission SUV with official markings. Government? I said. Or someone who took a government vehicle, Gloria said. Which describes most of the people who had government vehicles before this. We observed for 90 minutes. During that time, we counted 7 individuals moving between buildings. Organized, purposeful, carrying supplies. One of them was in uniform. The others wore civilian clothing. No weapons visible at distance, though that meant nothing. At 10:15, a woman emerged from the main building carrying a red plastic megaphone. She walked to the compound's front gate, faced the open road, and broadcast a message that carried clearly in the still morning air. Cache River Agricultural Station, USDA Operational Post. Medical capacity, water purification, radio communication. Any survivors on this frequency or within range of this broadcast, you are welcome here. Repeating at noon and 6 p.m. daily. She delivered it twice, set the megaphone on a fence post, and returned inside. Gloria looked at me. That's real. How do you know? Because she left the megaphone outside. Someone bluffing would guard every piece of equipment. Someone running a real station uses a megaphone as a signpost. I radioed Darren. The transmission was scratchy but legible. I described the compound, the personnel, the broadcast. The line was silent for several seconds. Then B's voice, not Darren's, asked them if they have contact with Little Rock. She wanted to know about her mother. That was the first time my daughter had said it out loud. We didn't approach the compound that day. We returned to the junkyard with the intelligence, and the 4 of us spent the evening of July 31st in what had become our default decision-making configuration. Darren at the north end of the plywood table with tactical concerns. Gloria at the south end with biological assessment. B in her bunk contributing data and analysis. And me in the middle trying to hold the shape of a conversation that had outgrown me. The question was not whether the USDA station was legitimate. Gloria was confident it was. And B's reading of the behavioral evidence supported her. The organizational patterns, the scheduled broadcast, the resource allocation all indicated a functioning institutional node rather than a predatory operation. The question was what approaching them would cost and what it would gain. Darren framed it. We go to them. We surrender operational security. They know where we are, how many we are, what we have. Right now, nobody knows about this bunker. That's worth more than a radio. Gloria countered. What we have is a hole in the ground with 18 days of water. What they have is purification, medical supplies, and communication. The math isn't complicated. Math is always complicated, Darren said. You're not calculating what happens if they decide our position is strategically useful and our cooperation isn't optional. This was the argument's core, and it surprised me because I expected the military man to favor alliance with an institutional authority, and the lone veterinarian to favor independence. But Darren had spent his Navy years inside a hierarchy, and what he'd learned there was that hierarchies consume the small to sustain the large. Gloria had spent her career as an autonomous practitioner whose relationship with institutions was transactional. She cooperated when it served her patients and resisted when it didn't. B cut through it. They have a radio, a real one, with range. I want to find my mom. Nobody spoke for 10 seconds. The butane stove hissed. The ventilation fans cycled air. Above us, through layers of steel and earth and scrap, the sky was doing whatever the sky does when no one is watching it. I looked at my daughter and saw, for the first time, without the distortion of guilt, without the filter of my own failure, what she had actually been doing for the past 2 weeks. Not just documenting infected behavior, not just calculating water reserves. She had been maintaining the illusion of analytical control over a situation in which her mother had disappeared into silence. Because if she could predict the movement of the dead, maybe she could tolerate the uncertainty of the living. Every notebook page, every sigmoid curve, every volumetric calculation of containment zones was a ward against the one variable she could not observe and could not model. Whether Renee was alive. And I had watched this and called it competence. I had been grateful for it. I had used my 14-year-old daughter's coping mechanism as an operational asset, without once asking what it was costing her. Darren saw it at the same time I did. I know because his hand moved involuntarily toward her and then stopped, the gesture of an uncle who recognized he was in the father's territory. I said, "Tomorrow. Gloria and I go back. We make contact. We ask about their radio capability and about Little Rock. Darren holds the bunker. B. B comes with you," B said. "B comes with me," I agreed. And the surprise on her face was a wound I deserved. The shock of a child who did not expect her father to treat her as someone whose need mattered more than his fear. Darren nodded. Gloria began packing her kit. B closed the notebook and set it on the shelf. The first time since her arrival that she'd voluntarily separated herself from it. That night, I lay in my bunk and listened to my daughter breathe in the darkness below me. And I understood that the bunker had done what it was designed to do. It had kept us alive. But alive is a floor, not a ceiling, and we had been living on the floor long enough. The Cache River Agricultural Station was run by a woman named Denise Oakley, who had been a USDA soil scientist before the outbreak, and had claimed the facility on July 12th, when its official staff abandoned it for a military staging area in Pine Bluff that, as far as anyone knew, no longer existed. She had a two-way HF radio capable of reaching Little Rock, Fort Smith, and, on good atmospheric days, Memphis, which answered with a recorded loop identifying it as a military exclusion zone. Denise met us at the gate on August 1st. She looked at Gloria first, then me, then B, and made an assessment that took less than 5 seconds. "The girl needs to eat something that isn't canned," she said, and walked us to a building where a man named Curtis was cooking eggs from chickens that lived in a converted equipment shed behind the station. B ate 3 eggs and a piece of bread baked from a USDA grain reserve. She didn't speak during the meal. She watched Curtis, who was large and quiet, and moved around the kitchen with the familiarity of someone who had cooked in commercial volumes before the world contracted. When he set a glass of reconstituted powdered orange juice in front of her, she said thank you, with a voice so small it was almost subvocal, and I looked away because I could not watch my daughter receive ordinary kindness without something structural in my chest threatening to give way. Denise showed us the radio after breakfast. It occupied a room in the station's main building. A desk, a transceiver, a wire antenna running to the roof, a logbook filled with entries in multiple hands. She had made contact with 14 survivor groups across eastern Arkansas, 2 in the Missouri Boot Heel, and 1 in Greenville, Mississippi. The groups ranged from 5 to 80 people. None had institutional backing. All were self-organized, resource-limited, and desperate for information about the outbreak's trajectory. "What do you know about Little Rock?" I asked. "Military presence on the western bank of the river. The bridges are blocked. Eastern Little Rock is compromised. A herd passed through on July 22nd, and the residential areas east of the interstate are abandoned or overrun. Western Little Rock has some holdout neighborhoods under National Guard coordination, but communication is intermittent. My ex-wife lives in West Little Rock," I said. Denise turned to the radio. "I can try the Guard frequency. They've answered twice in 3 weeks. Both times they read names from a survivor registry." She transmitted. Static. She transmitted again with our details. "Renee Purcell, West Little Rock address, dental practice on Chenal Parkway." Static. She logged the request and told us she'd try again at the next scheduled window. B stood by the radio for a long time after Denise finished. Then she turned to me and asked a question that reorganized every assumption I'd held about my role in her life. "Can we bring Darren here?" Not. "Can we move here?" Not. "Can we stay?" "Can we bring Darren?" She was not asking to abandon the junkyard. She was asking to expand the network, to connect our position to this one, to create a relationship between 2 points rather than choosing one over the other. She'd been mapping systems for 3 weeks, and she had learned that isolation is not safety. It is fragility, and that the thing which survives is not the strongest node, but the most connected one. Yes, I said. We can bring Darren here. Gloria was already talking to Denise about veterinary supplies, about livestock management, about the biological data B had collected, and what it meant for long-term survivability projections. Denise was listening with the focus of a scientist receiving field data she hadn't been able to collect from behind her station walls. B and I walked back that afternoon through the Cache River bottoms, the standing water cool around our ankles, the canopy filtering the August sun into green and gold. She walked ahead of me. She didn't consult the notebook. She navigated from memory, choosing paths through the flooded timber, with a confidence that came from something older than her data. Something physical, directional, alive. She was not following me home. I was following her forward. The radio reached the National Guard frequency on August 4th. A sergeant read names from a registry for 11 minutes. Renee Purcell was not on the list. The sergeant said the list was incomplete, that new names were added daily, that absence from the registry was not confirmation of anything. B listened to the entire transmission from a folding chair beside the radio. Her hands in her lap, her face composed. Darren moved to the station on August 3rd. He walked the 5 miles on a back he managed with ibuprofen and willpower, carrying the Remington and a pack of essential supplies. The bunker remained sealed, stocked, accessible. A fallback position in the network B is building, not a home. I don't know what I built under that junkyard. I thought it was a shelter. Darren thought it was a duty station. B turned it into a research laboratory, then outgrew it. The $50,000 is gone. Spent on steel and earth and canned food and a hole in the ground that kept 3 people and 1 stranger alive long enough to find something worth walking toward. B tries the radio every evening at 6. She hasn't stopped. Neither have I.